Madam Chair, I move that S 1409, the Kids Online Safety Act, as amended by the Blackburn substitute, Cruz 1, Cruz 2, Lujan 1 as modified, Lujan 2 as modified, Lummis 1 and Lummis 2 be reported favorably.
Is there a second?
Madam Chair.
Is there a second? Thank you. Discussion.
Sure.
Madam Chairman?
What, Senator Schatz?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I call up Schatz 4. We are in a crisis. We are now more than a decade into the largest epidemic of teen mental illness on record, and we know exactly what's driving it. Social media and its algorithmic boosting that uses kids' personal data to manipulate them. This started in around 2012, coinciding with the release of smartphones with front-facing cameras, and it is continued in lockstep with the popularity of apps like Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. And the business model is very simple. The duration of a user on the app and the extent to which they engage with the content is directly correlated to ad revenue. And so social media companies have stumbled upon a stubborn but devastating fact. The way to get kids to linger on platforms and maximize profit is to upset them, to make them outraged, agitated, scared, vulnerable, despondent, anxious, suicidal, homicidal. And the results are catastrophic. A study from the CDC has found that nearly two-thirds of high school girls and one-third of high school boys feel persistently sad or hopeless. And 22% of all high school students, 22% of all high school students have seriously considered suicide in the preceding year. Now, I have a bipartisan bill now with more than 10 members called the Protecting Kids on Social Media Act, and it is a common sense, bipartisan approach to help to stop this suffering. Following the Surgeon General's recommendations, it prohibits users under the age of 13 from accessing social media platforms at all. I want everybody to understand how crisp that is. I want everybody to understand that that is the collective judgment that we're eventually going to have to make. Are these things safe at all? Is there any public policy upside for a 9-year-old to be on TikTok and to get body image issues and to become increasingly despondent and never leave their house and constantly stare at their phone? That is what's happening. Ask any parent. Ask any parent. And I will note that many of the co-sponsors of my legislation are parents. It requires social media companies to verify the age of their users and raises the verification standards so you can't just click a button and say, yeah, I'm 18. It requires parental consent for users 13 through 17, letting families make best decisions for their children. And for users under 18, it bans algorithmic boosting, which is euphemistically described as personalized recommendations by the tech companies. As for-profit businesses, social media companies have a responsibility to maximize revenue, and what does that mean? They have a responsibility to systematically create a mental health crisis in this generation of kids and the generation to come. No child should get anxious going on YouTube. No child should be depressed from TikTok. No child should want to kill themselves because of what they saw on Instagram. And by instituting these simple and straightforward guidelines, we'll be able to give the next generation some hope and some safety. I've had a very productive conversation with the chair and a brief conversation with the ranking member, and I won't speak for her, but I am very confident that we're going to be able to work towards a markup in the fall, and so therefore I withdraw the amendment.
Senator Schatz, I want to thank you for your leadership on privacy overall. You and Senator Wicker have played a key role in the discussion of online privacy for some time now, and appreciate it. And I do believe your idea about successfully making sure that a certain age group is prohibited from their access is an important idea. So I want to work with you to mark up your legislation in the future. I do think that this is an important concept. I think the current draft language has some questions about its actual intention, and so I'd like to work with you to perfect that language for the future.
Thank you.
And Madam Chair, I'd like to reiterate what you just said. Senator Schatz and I had a brief conversation this morning, and I am eager to work with him on this legislation. He and I are both fathers. I've got a 12-year-old daughter and a 15-year-old daughter, and the threats that Senator Schatz described are real and acute, and every parent of teens and near teens is struggling with it. I hope this committee can move legislation that addresses this problem forward, because it is what we are doing to our kids is unconscionable.
Thank you. Senator Thune.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to comment and compliment Senator Schatz on his statement. Very powerful, very accurate, and we disagree on a lot of things here in the U.S. Senate, but I think if we can't get together when 1/3 of teenage girls in the United States are contemplating killing themselves, then nothing else, in my view, should even matter. So this is a really important area of increasing bipartisan support, and there's been a lot of leaders on this. Senator Blackburn, Senator Blumenthal, Senator Schatz. I just think this is an area that we have to prioritize as U.S. senators. Read the stats, read the statistics. We talk a lot about this is a crisis, that's a crisis. This is a crisis. Youth mental health in America is a real, bona fide crisis, and we got to get on it. So I want to thank Senator Schatz. That was a very powerful, articulate statement of the problem.
Well, I definitely look forward to using all our colleagues' energies to focus on this when we return in September, among other issues related to AI and privacy as well. Senator Thune.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Ranking Member Cruz, for holding today's executive session. That is a very sobering issue, and this is legislation, the COSA bill, which, as you point out, Senators Blackburn and others, Blumenthal, have worked on for a really long time. And yeah, the data is very, very sobering, and it's an issue we need to address. And I want to offer an amendment to this legislation, which I think ties into that issue. There was an article a while back in the Wall Street Journal, and the headline is how TikTok serves up sex and drug videos to minors. And I've been working on a bill for some time. It's in the last two Congresses, co-sponsored by Senators Blackburn, Moran, Schatz, Lummis, Klobuchar, Collins, Blumenthal, and Warner. And I want to offer it as an amendment to this. It's one of several, I think, tech bills that needs this committee's attention. We have yet to, since I introduced this bill back in 2019, consider any proposals to bring additional transparency and accountability to the largest tech companies. And exactly 1 year ago, I offered and withdrew the Filter Bubble Transparency Act as an amendment when the committee passed COSA, with a commitment that filter bubble would be considered at a future markup. And I think this is that perfect opportunity, that perfect markup. It's my view that this committee has a unique opportunity to exercise its jurisdiction to address many of the concerns we've all heard about social media's damaging effect on consumers. We've all heard the testimony time and time again in front of this committee that people aren't always aware of the way that big tech companies collect user data and mold online experiences for billions of users, which is exactly why I introduced this legislation in the first place. And let me just say, this is a regular order process. We've had multiple hearings on this subject, on the legislation, on the issue, and I think it's time for us to act. It does tie in exactly to what we're talking about here, and that is dealing with these issues where you are allowing the algorithm to decide what people see rather than letting people decide what they see. The filter bubble is a very simple concept. A tech company has to notify you if they are using an algorithm to manipulate the content that you see. And secondly, they have to give you the option of not being manipulated by an algorithm and just seeing content in a regular chronological feed. It's a straightforward way of bringing more transparency and more accountability to big tech, and and children are certainly subjected on a daily basis to the filter bubble. So I've been pushing for several years now. I said I introduced this in 2019. I called it up a year ago today as an amendment, withdrew it with an understanding that we get an opportunity to vote on it at a certain time in the future. And we've had multiple hearings on this subject. It's a very clear and simple response and something that I think this committee ought to act on in this space. Very simple. They have to notify you if they're using an algorithm to manipulate what you're seeing. Secondly, they have to give the consumer the option to decide whether or not they want to be manipulated by an algorithm or whether they would like to see their content in a normal chronological feed. It's a straightforward amendment, and I think it fits nicely within what we're trying to accomplish here today, and I would urge the committee to adopt it.
Further discussion? Senator Klobuchar.
Yes, I've been a long time co-sponsor of Senator Thune's amendment, and I want to thank him. I do think that the time, as he noted, for hearings is over. We've had so many hearings on this, and I want to especially thank Senator Blumenthal and Senator Blackburn for their leadership. Senator Blumenthal here in the front row, having previously been on this committee. We won't hold it against him that he left. But the whole idea here is that so many of us have been involved in this issue, but yet we still haven't passed any laws, whether it's about competition policy, whether it's about upholding newspapers that are folding every single day, whether it's about child privacy, and just the time for talk is done because this is folding around us, as pointed out so well by so many of my colleagues. So I'm glad that we have some bipartisan support for this bill. I'm eager to support it and glad that Senator Thune put in his amendment on something critical, the manipulation of kids.
Further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? The amendment is agreed to. Now is on Senator Cruz's motion on passage. All those in favor?
Madam Chairman?
Yes.
I-
Senator Blackburn.
Pardon me. Thank you so much. Of course, we are appreciative of the markup today, and Senator Blumenthal is here today. I think it's important to note, as we've discussed, pardon me, sinuses, allergies, as we have discussed how long it has taken to get to this point where we're actually going to move something. Now, Peter Welch was in the House with me when we came up with the first online bipartisan privacy bill. And it was there at Energy and Commerce Committee. That, believe it or not, was 2012. So it's been a long time in the works. And big tech has fought every step of the way on this process. And Senator Blumenthal and I have remarked many times as we've met with parents, as we've met with teachers and medical professionals and mental health professionals and heard hours of testimony, how devastating this is, totally devastating it is to these families and the loss of life of our teens. And the Surgeon General was in my office this morning before we came down here for the markup. And he is quite concerned about what is happening with the mental health of our children. I think there's something that is important to note on this bill. It puts the burden on big tech to do privacy by design, safety by design, to expose these algorithms and to create that safer environment for our children. So I thank our staffs and everyone who has worked on this, and I encourage passage.
Thank you, Senator Blackburn, and thank you to you, particularly for that long-standing activity in this area, both in the House of Representatives and here on the committee, and to our colleague who was with us. I'm not sure if you miss being on the committee. Maybe that's a good idea. You're off the committee. I will point out to my colleagues, I love the enthusiasm and the bipartisan nature today. I will point out we did pass these bills out of committee last year, and they languished on the floor. So while we are passing